Virus outbreak movies used to feel like pure fiction. A strange illness appears. A few people get sick. Officials say everything is under control. And then, within days, fear spreads faster than the virus itself. After seeing virus headlines return in 2026, I decided to watch 8 outbreak movies again. Not to spread panic, but to see which ones still feel believable today. Some of them are pure entertainment. Some are intense survival stories. But a few felt disturbingly realistic. Because the scariest thing in these movies is not always the disease. Sometimes, it's the silence before anyone takes it seriously. Sometimes, it's the panic after people realize the truth. And sometimes, it's the way ordinary life changes before anyone is ready. So today, these are 8 virus outbreak movies that hit differently now. And by the end of this list, there's one movie that doesn't feel like fiction anymore. It feels like something the world has already lived through. At first, Perfect Sense doesn't look like a typical virus outbreak movie. There are no massive quarantine zones, no military roadblocks, and no dramatic news reports every 5 seconds. Instead, the movie follows a strange global condition where people slowly begin to lose their senses. First, something disappears, then something else, and little by little, the world becomes unfamiliar. What makes Perfect Sense so interesting is that it doesn't focus on the science of the outbreak. It focuses on what happens to people when the basic things they trust start vanishing. Taste, smell, touch, connection, memory. The movie feels quiet, almost poetic, but underneath that calm surface, there is a very uncomfortable idea. What if a global crisis doesn't arrive with explosions and chaos? What if it arrives slowly, personally, and emotionally? This is not the most realistic outbreak movie on the list in a medical sense, but it understands something very real about human beings. When the world changes, people don't just fear death. They fear losing the simple things that made life feel normal. And that's why Perfect Sense feels so different from most films in this genre. It's not about surviving the outbreak. It's about learning how fragile normal life really is. Panic in the Streets is an older film, but its idea still works surprisingly well. The story begins with a dead body and a terrifying discovery. The victim may have carried a dangerous disease. Now, authorities have only a limited amount of time to find everyone who might have been exposed before the infection spreads. What makes this movie still effective is the urgency. There is no global disaster yet, no worldwide panic, no collapse of society, just a small window of time where the right people have to act fast. And honestly, that makes it feel more believable, because not every outbreak begins with millions of people infected. Sometimes it begins with one case that nobody understands yet. One person, one contact, one missed warning. The movie also shows how difficult it can be to stop a threat before the public even knows what is happening. Authorities are racing against time, but they also have to avoid causing mass panic. That balance feels very modern. How much should people be told? When should officials act? And what happens if they wait too long? For a movie from another era, Panic in the Streets still understands one of the most frightening parts of an outbreak. The earliest stage when the danger is already moving, but most people have no idea. The Cassandra Crossing takes the outbreak idea and puts it inside one of the most claustrophobic places possible, a train. A group of passengers may have been exposed to a dangerous infection, and suddenly, the train becomes more than just transportation. It becomes a moving quarantine zone. That setup alone makes the movie tense. Because when an outbreak happens in a closed environment, every small action feels dangerous. A cough feels suspicious. A conversation feels risky. Even the air around people starts to feel threatening. What makes the Cassandra Crossing interesting is not just the disease itself, but the way people in power respond to it. The passengers are treated less like individuals and more like a problem that needs to be contained. And that's where the film becomes more disturbing, because outbreak movies often ask one uncomfortable question. When public safety is at risk, how much humanity gets lost in the decision-making? This movie is dramatic, yes. At times, it feels very much like a 1970s disaster thriller. But the central fear still works. Being trapped somewhere, knowing that other people are making life-or-death choices for you. A virus on a train may sound like a movie concept, but the fear behind it, being stuck, isolated, and powerless, feels very real. 93 Days is different from most movies on this list because it is based on a real Ebola outbreak in Nigeria. And because of that, it carries a different kind of weight. This is not a movie built around spectacle. It is not trying to turn disease into entertainment. Instead, it focuses on doctors, nurses, health officials, and ordinary people facing an extremely dangerous situation with very limited room for mistakes. What makes 93 Days powerful is that it shows how much depends on early decisions. One patient, one hospital, one team of people trying to stop something before it becomes much bigger. The movie reminds you that during an outbreak, heroism doesn't always look cinematic. Sometimes it looks like staying in a room you're afraid to enter. Sometimes it looks like following protocol when everything feels urgent. Sometimes it looks like making a sacrifice that most people will never fully understand. That's why this film feels important. It brings the human side of outbreak response to the front. Behind every headline, there are people making impossible choices. People who are tired. People who are scared. People who still have to do the job. 93 Days may not be the most famous film on this list, but it is one of the most grounded. And because it comes from a real crisis, it doesn't need to exaggerate the fear. The reality is already enough. Carriers is one of the quietest outbreak movies here, but also one of the coldest. There are no giant action scenes, no huge government response, no clear solution waiting at the end. Instead, the movie follows a small group of people trying to survive after a deadly infection has changed the world. And what makes it disturbing is how simple the question becomes. How far would you go to protect yourself? That's where Carriers becomes more than just a virus movie. It becomes a film about trust, fear, selfishness, and survival. The infection is dangerous, but the real tension comes from human behavior. Who do you help? Who do you leave behind? What rules do you break? And at what point does survival turn you into someone you no longer recognize? That's why this movie still works. It understands that during a crisis, the disease is only one part of the horror. The other part is what fear does to relationships. Friends become risks. Strangers become threats. Compassion becomes dangerous. Compared to bigger outbreak films, Carriers feels smaller and more personal. But that actually makes it hit harder in some moments. Because it doesn't ask, can the world be saved? It asks something much darker. If the world cannot be saved, what kind of person would you become? Virus is a 2019 Indian film based around the Nipah virus outbreak, and it is one of the strongest examples of a serious, grounded outbreak movie. What makes this film stand out is its focus on process. The movie doesn't treat an outbreak like a simple action plot. It shows the confusion, investigation, contact tracing, fear, medical pressure, and community response that come with trying to contain something dangerous. And that makes it feel very believable, because real outbreak response is not just one dramatic speech or one heroic moment. It is a chain of decisions. Who was exposed? Where did they go? Who did they meet? How fast can doctors identify the threat? How fast can officials respond before the situation grows? Virus understands that the smallest details matter. A movement, a visit, a delay, a missed connection. The movie also does something important. It shows that an outbreak is not only a medical crisis. It becomes a social crisis too. People are afraid. Rumors spread. Trust becomes fragile. Every decision is questioned. That's what makes the film feel so real. It is not designed like a Hollywood disaster movie. It feels more procedural, more human, and more connected to the real world. For a Cinepicks list, this is exactly the kind of film that makes the video feel different from generic movie recommendations. Because Virus doesn't just entertain. It shows how hard it actually is to stop fear from becoming part of the outbreak. The Flu is a South Korean outbreak thriller, and it takes the fear of infection into a crowded modern city. The movie begins with a deadly virus spreading quickly, and soon the situation becomes bigger than the doctors, bigger than the hospitals, and bigger than the people trying to stay calm. What makes The Flu so watchable is its speed. Once the outbreak begins, the movie keeps raising the pressure. Hospitals become overwhelmed. Families are separated. The government has to make brutal decisions, and the public starts reacting with panic, anger, and desperation. It is more dramatic than some of the realistic films on this list, but emotionally it works, because it captures something very true about outbreaks in large cities. When fear spreads through a dense population, everything becomes harder. Containing the disease is only one problem. Containing panic is another. The movie also shows how quickly people can lose trust when they feel they are not being protected or told the full truth. And that is what makes The Flu feel relevant. It's not just about a virus moving from person to person. It's about pressure moving through an entire society. The film is intense, sometimes emotional, sometimes chaotic, but it understands the nightmare of a city suddenly realizing that normal life is over. And when that realization hits, the movie becomes genuinely uncomfortable. Contagion is probably the first movie people think of when we talk about realistic outbreak cinema. But what makes it terrifying is not the death count or the panic or even the virus itself. It's how ordinary everything feels at the beginning. A touch, a handshake, a cough, a dinner table, an airport, a phone call. The movie understands that a global crisis doesn't always begin with chaos. Sometimes it begins with something so small that nobody notices it until it is already too late. That is why Contagion feels different from most outbreak films. It doesn't need monsters. It doesn't need exaggeration. It doesn't need constant action. The fear comes from how realistic the chain reaction feels. People get sick. Experts investigate. Rumors spread, stores empty, trust collapses, and suddenly, everyone is trying to understand a threat that is moving faster than certainty. Watching this movie now is uncomfortable because so many details feel familiar. Not because it predicted everything perfectly, but because it understood human behavior. It understood how quickly misinformation can spread, how badly people want easy answers, how fragile public trust can be, and how terrifying it is when science needs time, but fear moves instantly. That's why Contagion is #1. It is not just a virus movie. It is a movie about systems, panic, communication, and the invisible connections between people. And out of every film on this list, this is the one that feels the least like fiction. Feels like a warning we already heard. And maybe, in some ways, a warning we are still trying to understand. So those were 10 virus outbreak movies that felt very different when I watched them again. Some are realistic, some are dramatic, some are old, but still surprisingly effective. And some remind us that the most frightening part of an outbreak is not always the disease itself. Can be the delay, the confusion, the panic, the misinformation, or the moment people realize life is not as stable as they thought. That's what makes these movies powerful. They are not just about viruses. They are about people under pressure. And maybe that's why they still work. Because every outbreak story eventually becomes a human story. Which one of these movies felt the most realistic to you? And is there another outbreak film that should have been on this list? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next Cinepicks video.